My fiancé publicly humiliated my mother at dinner while I covered wedding costs, so I called off the engagement and left them in shock. I'm a 28-year-old guy, and when I got engaged, I genuinely believed love meant carrying the weight quietly without complaining. I'd grown up watching my mom do exactly that: no drama, no praise, just sacrifice, so stepping up felt natural to me. My fiancé came from a family obsessed with appearances, status, and what things looked like from the outside, while I was raised by a single mother who stretched every dollar and never made me feel the strain. I thought love was proven by effort, not words, and I was proud of that. When we started planning the wedding, I slid into the provider role without even discussing it. I covered the venue deposit, the photographer, and the first round of vendor payments like it was nothing. Every time I pulled out my card, she'd squeeze my hand and smile, saying things like, "You're just so dependable," or, "I don't know what I'd do without you." I remember her laughing softly one night and saying, "You're my rock. I feel so safe with you." Hearing that made my chest swell. It made the numbers feel smaller. Her family loved to talk about the wedding, how elegant it needed to be, how certain things were non-negotiable, but they never talked about money. Somehow, that silence always landed on me. My mom noticed it right away. She asked gently, "Are you sure you're okay paying for all this?" I brushed it off, telling her, "It's temporary. We're building our future." My fiancée framed every expense as an investment. "This is our forever," she'd say, scrolling through options on her phone. "We only do this once." And I believed her. I wanted to believe her. But somewhere between the praise and the pressure, I started to realize something felt off, like my willingness wasn't just appreciated anymore. It was being counted on. And I didn't yet understand how quickly generosity can turn into leverage when people get comfortable with your silence. I didn't notice the shift right away, because it didn't happen all at once. It was subtle, almost polite. One expense became two became routine, and suddenly I was the default solution anytime money came up. If something needed a deposit, the room would go quiet until my fiancé looked at me and said, casually, "Babe, can you handle this one?" like it wasn't even a question. Her parents were always full of opinions. Her mom would wrinkle her nose at options and say things like, "That looks a bit modest," or "People will talk if it's not done properly." Her dad loved to nod along and add, "Weddings set the tone for a marriage." No one ever mentioned contributing. Not once. They talked standards, I paid invoices. At home, I started opening my banking app more than I slept. Numbers that used to make me feel secure now made my stomach tighten. I told myself it was fine, that it was temporary, that once the wedding was over things would even out. When I tried to bring it up, gently, my fiancé would sigh and say, "Why are you stressing? You said you had this." Then she'd soften, touch my arm, and add, "I just thought you wanted to take care of us." My mom noticed before I did how one-sided it was becoming. She'd watch me come home exhausted, flipping through contracts at the kitchen table, and say quietly, "Just don't lose yourself trying to prove something." I laughed it off, but her words stuck with me. Especially when I realized my fiancé never asked if I was okay, only when the next payment was due. The worst part wasn't the money. It was the way my role narrowed. I wasn't a partner making decisions anymore, I was the safety net. The fixer. The guy who made discomfort disappear with a swipe of his card. And the more I paid, the more everyone seemed to assume I always would. By the time she suggested a fancy family dinner to celebrate the engagement, insisting I book somewhere impressive, I agreed automatically, without realizing that night would be the first time my silence would cost more than money. The dinner was supposed to be a milestone. That's how my fiancé framed it, a moment for our families to finally come together. She was very specific about the restaurant. Not just nice, but the kind of place where the lighting was low, the menus had no prices, and everyone around you looked like they belonged there. When I hesitated, she laughed and said, "Relax. This is important. First impressions last forever." So I made the reservation and told myself it was just one more expense. When we arrived, her parents were already seated, perfectly dressed, scanning the room like judges. My mom came a few minutes later, nervous but smiling, wearing the nicest outfit she owned. I could see her taking everything in: the heavy silverware, the quiet confidence of the staff, and I felt a familiar knot of protectiveness tighten in my chest. I leaned over and whispered, "You look great," and she squeezed my hand under the table. At first, the conversation stayed polite. Safe topics: work, travel, wedding timelines. Her mother asked my mom where she worked, then tilted her head slightly, like she'd already decided the answer wasn't going to impress her. My fiancée sat between us, sipping wine, glowing with attention. Every now and then, she'd glance at me and smile, like we were sharing a secret. As the evening went on, the comments started to shift. Small things. Jokes about different upbringings. Remarks about how lucky I was to be marrying into a family with standards. Each time, I waited for my fiancé to step in. To redirect. To protect my mom the way I always protected her. But she didn't. She just kept smiling. Then the waiter brought the main courses, and my fiancé laughed, too loudly, and said something that made the table go quiet. I remember the sound of cutlery stopping. The weight of everyone's eyes shifting. And the look on my mother's face as she realized the joke was about her. That was the moment I understood this dinner wasn't about celebration at all. It was about showing everyone exactly where they thought my mother, and by extension, me, belonged. I can still hear her voice when I think about it, light, amused, like she was saying something harmless. My fiancée leaned back in her chair, glanced at my mom's plate, and said, "You know, it's kind of wild how different worlds can be." She laughed softly and added, I guess when you grow up, simpler, you don't really notice these things." Her mother smiled into her wineglass. Her father didn't say anything at all. The table went quiet in that thick, uncomfortable way where no one wants to be the first to react. My mom froze, fork halfway to her mouth, eyes darting toward me like she wasn't sure she'd heard correctly. I felt heat rush to my face. My fiancé kept going. "I'm just saying," she shrugged, "it must be overwhelming being here. This place is probably more than you're used to." She laughed again. This time, a few people joined in, short, awkward laughs that made it worse. I waited for her to stop. For anyone, to say something. I waited for my fiancé to realize she'd crossed a line and backtrack. She didn't. She looked proud, like she'd landed a punchline. My mom set her fork down slowly and forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she said quietly. "I raised my son to be comfortable anywhere." That should have ended it. Instead, my fiancée tilted her head and said, "Well, you did a good job. He definitely married up." The words landed like a slap. My chest tightened so hard it hurt to breathe. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, loud and angry. I wanted to stand up. I wanted to say something sharp and final. But years of being the calm one, the fixer, the peacemaker kicked in. I just sat there, gripping my napkin, watching my mother shrink into herself in front of strangers while the woman I planned to marry smiled like she'd won something. When the check came, I paid it. Of course I did. And as we walked out into the cold night air, my fiancée slipped her arm through mine and said, cheerfully, "See? That went well." That was the moment something inside me cracked, and I knew I couldn't unsee what she'd just shown me. The ride home was silent in that heavy, suffocating way where words feel dangerous. My fiancée scrolled through her phone like nothing had happened, humming softly to herself. My mom sat in the back seat, staring out the window, shoulders pulled in tight. I kept replaying the dinner in my head, every laugh, every pause where I should have spoken up and didn't. My hands were clenched so hard on the steering wheel they ached. As soon as we dropped my mom off, my fiancée finally spoke. "You were really tense back there," she said, not looking at me. "You kind of killed the vibe." I laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. "You humiliated my mom," I said. The words felt strange coming out, like I wasn't allowed to say them. She rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, don't be dramatic. It was a joke. She's just sensitive." That word, sensitive, hit harder than anything else. I told her it wasn't okay, that my mom didn't deserve that. She crossed her arms and sighed, like she was dealing with a stubborn child. "So what, you want me to apologize for being honest?" My parents noticed it too. They just didn't say anything. Then she added, casually, you should be grateful they even invited her. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Later that night, my phone buzzed. Her mother. Dinner was lovely. Don't let small misunderstandings cause drama. Her father followed with, families are different. Best to adjust. Not one message asked how my mom felt. Not one acknowledged what was said. The message was clear, keep the peace, swallow it, move on. When I checked on my mom, she tried to make it easier for me. It's fine, she said softly. I don't want to be the reason your engagement gets complicated. That broke me more than the dinner itself. She was protecting me again, even after being humiliated. Everyone expected me to stay quiet. To pay, to smile, to smooth things over like I always did. And I almost convinced myself I should. But deep down, something was shifting. Because if I stayed silent now, I wasn't just choosing peace, I was teaching them exactly how much disrespect I'd tolerate. And they were already testing how far they could push it. After the dinner, something changed, and not in the way people say relationships get stronger after conflict. It was like a switch flipped. The wedding planning accelerated, but so did the demands. My fiancé started sending me links late at night. We need to upgrade the flowers. This photographer is more our level. My parents think the venue looks cheap unless we add this package. Every message landed with the quiet assumption that I'd say yes. When I hesitated, even once, she'd sigh dramatically and say, I just don't want my family to be embarrassed. That word again. Embarrassed. As if my existence, or my mother's, was something that needed managing. I reminded her I was already covering most of the costs. She smiled tightly and replied, you said you wanted to take care of us. I thought that meant everything. Her parents didn't even bother hiding it anymore. At planning meetings, they spoke through her, not to me. He'll handle it, her mom would say, waving a hand in my direction without eye contact. Her dad joked once, well, at least we know the groom's good for it. Everyone laughed. I forced a smile that made my face hurt. At night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, running numbers in my head until they blurred together. My savings, years of careful planning, were evaporating. Money I'd set aside for a house, emergencies, a future that felt stable. I told myself it was temporary. I always did. But my body knew better. My chest felt tight all the time. My jaw ached from clenching. The worst part was how my fiancée talked about it like it was proof of love. This is what partnership looks like, she said one evening, curled up on the couch while I recalculated budgets. Not everyone can step up like you. It sounded like praise, but it felt like a leash. I started to realize the dinner hadn't been a mistake or a bad joke. It had been a test. A way to see if I'd swallow the disrespect and keep paying anyway. And I had. Which meant, in their eyes, they were free to keep going. I didn't know it yet, but I was already standing on the edge of something I wouldn't be able to come back from. The truth didn't come from my fiancée. It came from someone she didn't think mattered enough to keep quiet. A few weeks after the dinner, I ran into her cousin at a coffee shop near my office. We'd met a handful of times before. She'd always been polite, a little awkward, but that day, she looked uncomfortable the moment she saw me. Like she'd been caught holding something she wasn't supposed to have. We made small talk at first. Weather. Work. Wedding plans. Then she hesitated and said, "Can I ask you something?" "And you don't have to answer." I shrugged, already uneasy. She lowered her voice. "Do you know how her parents talk about you?" My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" She wrapped her hands around her cup like she needed the warmth. "They call you the safe option," she said. "They joke that you're reliable enough to build a life on." I laughed reflexively, waiting for the punchline. It didn't come. She continued, quieter now. "They never planned on paying for the wedding. They assumed you would. From the start." I felt dizzy. She told me they discussed my income openly at family gatherings, numbers, savings, how lucky their daughter was. My fiancée wasn't correcting them. She was participating. She said you didn't mind, her cousin added quickly, like she was trying to soften the blow. That you liked being needed. The dinner suddenly made sense. The joke. The silence. The confidence. It wasn't a slip. It was a demonstration. A way of establishing hierarchy. They weren't just mocking my mom, they were showing me where they thought I ranked, too. I walked out of that coffee shop numb, my ears ringing. Every compliment replayed differently now. Dependable. Solid. My rock. None of it was about love. It was about usefulness. Stability. Control. That night, my fiancée curled up next to me and talked excitedly about the seating chart. I really looked at her, and wondered how long she'd been smiling while counting what I was worth. And for the first time since the engagement, I didn't feel confused. I felt betrayed. I didn't confront her right away. I needed time to sit with what I'd learned, to make sure I wasn't overreacting or twisting things in my head. But the more I replayed it, the more everything lined up too perfectly. So one night, after dinner, I finally said, we need to talk about the wedding. About money. And about what happened with my mom. She stiffened immediately. Not confused. Not surprised. Defensive. What about it? She asked, arms crossing over her chest. I told her I felt disrespected. That the dinner wasn't okay. That I was uncomfortable being expected to pay for everything without discussion. I tried to keep my voice calm, measured, like I was negotiating instead of confronting someone I loved. She laughed once, short and sharp. So you're really doing this now, she said. After everything I've told my parents? I asked what she meant, and she shook her head like I was exhausting. I told them you were handling things. That you wanted to. Now you're making me look stupid. That's when I realized the conversation wasn't about my feelings at all. It was about optics. I told her I needed boundaries, that I couldn't keep draining my savings, that my mom deserved respect. Her face hardened. You're being insecure, she snapped. This is what commitment looks like. If you can't handle pressure, how are we supposed to get married? When I didn't back down, she went quiet. Then she said the words that finally broke something in me, if you start pulling back now, maybe we shouldn't be engaged at all. It wasn't a discussion. It was a threat. The next day, her parents called. Not to ask what happened, but to lecture me. About responsibility. About tradition. About how I was changing. The message was clear, fall back in line, or be the problem. I sat there holding my phone, heart pounding, realizing that setting one small boundary had turned me into the villain. And if this was how they reacted now, before the wedding, what would my life look like after? For the first time, the idea of going through with it didn't feel heavy. It felt terrifying. That week broke me in a way I didn't expect. I stopped sleeping. Every night, I lay on my back staring at the ceiling, my phone glowing in my hand as I scrolled through bank statements, contracts, messages. Numbers blurred together until they stopped feeling real. I kept thinking, maybe I pushed too hard. Maybe I should have handled it better. That's how deep it had gotten, where I was questioning my own right to feel disrespected. One night, around 2 a.m., I actually typed out an apology text. I told her I was stressed, that I didn't mean to cause tension, that I just needed reassurance. I reread it over and over, my thumb hovering over send. The idea of apologizing felt disgusting and relieving at the same time. Like surrender. Like survival. I imagined the future if I sent it. The wedding would move forward. The tension would fade. I'd keep paying. I'd keep smiling. My mom would keep swallowing hurt so I could keep the peace. And one day, years from now, I'd look in the mirror and wonder when I'd disappeared. I went to see my mom the next morning. She was folding laundry, quiet as always. I tried to sound casual when I asked, "Did what she said, did it bother you?" She paused, then nodded. "Of course it did," she said softly. "But I'm okay." Then she looked at me and added, "I just don't want you stuck somewhere you're not respected. Not because of me." Something in my chest cracked wide open. I realized I was closer to betraying myself and her than anyone else ever had. I deleted the apology. My hands were shaking. Later that day, my fiancée called, irritated. "My parents are asking if you're done being dramatic yet," she said. I didn't answer right away. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, feeling smaller than I ever had. This was my lowest point, not the humiliation, not the money, but the moment I almost chose comfort over dignity. And once I saw that clearly, I knew there was no going back. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't rehearse anything in the mirror. I just knew that if I waited any longer, I'd talk myself out of it. So that evening, when my fiancée came home talking about final fittings and guest counts like nothing was wrong, I interrupted her. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. "We need to stop," I said. "The wedding. The engagement. All of it." She blinked at me, confused, then laughed. "Okay," she said slowly. "Very funny." When I didn't smile back, her laugh faded. "You're serious?" I nodded. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I told her I couldn't marry someone who disrespected my mother, who treated my love like a credit line, who saw boundaries as betrayal. Her face hardened instantly. "You're throwing everything away over one dinner," she snapped. I shook my head. It wasn't one dinner. It was everything that came after. She accused me of being weak. Of panicking. Of sabotaging our future. Then she said, coldly, "You won't find someone like me again." That's when I did something I'd never done before. I pulled out my phone and opened my email. In front of her, I canceled vendor payments. The venue deposit. The upgrades. One by one. Her eyes widened. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "I'm stopping," I said. "I'm done paying to be disrespected." She started crying then, but it wasn't heartbreak. It was panic. She called her mother, pacing the room, whispering urgently. I could hear raised voices through the phone. Words like embarrassment, reputation, what will people say? No one asked if I was okay. No one apologized. I packed a bag that night. As I zipped it closed, she stood in the doorway, staring at me like she didn't recognize me anymore. Maybe she didn't. Because for the first time since we'd met, I wasn't useful. As I walked out, my phone buzzed nonstop. Calls. Messages. Demands. And I knew the fallout was just beginning. By the next morning, my phone was unusable. Missed calls stacked on top of each other, her parents, her friends, even people I barely knew. My fiancée had clearly gone into damage control mode overnight. The story she told wasn't about disrespect or manipulation. It was about me losing it, panicking under pressure, throwing away a perfect relationship. I was painted as unstable. Ungrateful. Immature. Her mother left a voicemail that made my stomach turn. "You have humiliated our family," she said sharply. "Do you have any idea how this looks?" Another message followed from her father. "A real man doesn't walk away when things get hard." Not one word about my mother. Not one apology. Just shame, layered thick and heavy. What finally pushed everything into the open was a post my ex made online. It was vague, but loaded, talking about betrayal, fear of commitment, how she deserved better. People flooded the comments with sympathy. Some even tagged me. I stared at the screen for a long time, my hands shaking, realizing that if I stayed silent now, this version of events would become the truth. So I didn't stay silent. I didn't rant. I didn't insult anyone. I just explained calmly why I ended the engagement. I talked about the dinner. About my mother being mocked. About being expected to bankroll a wedding while being treated as disposable. I didn't name-call. I didn't exaggerate. I let the facts speak. The response was immediate and not what her family expected. Messages started coming in from people who'd seen things they never questioned before. A few even apologized for assuming I was the problem. Her post disappeared within an hour. The call stopped shortly after. That night, I returned the ring. No note. No confrontation. Just closure. When I walked away from the drop-off point, the air felt lighter, like I'd been holding my breath for months and finally let it go. I knew the story they'd tell about me would never fully disappear. But for the first time, I didn't feel the urge to fix it. Because the only person I needed to believe me already did. The weeks after everything ended were quieter than I expected. No chaos. No dramatic apologies. Just space. At first, the silence felt unsettling, like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. But slowly, something unfamiliar settled in relief. I wasn't bracing myself anymore. I wasn't checking my phone with dread or running numbers in my head at 2 a.m. I could breathe. My mom noticed it before I did. One evening, we were sitting at her kitchen table, the same one I grew up doing homework at, and she looked at me for a long moment before saying, "You seem lighter." Her voice cracked when she added, "I'm proud of you." That hit harder than any apology ever could. For years, she'd taught me to endure quietly. This time, she watched me choose myself. Financially, I had to rebuild. There's no way around that. I'd lost deposits. Time. Trust. But every payment I didn't make after walking away felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I stopped seeing money as proof of worth and started seeing it as security, my security. Something I could protect instead of surrendering to earn love. Emotionally, the lesson took longer to sink in. I had to unlearn the belief that being dependable meant being silent, that strength meant swallowing disrespect. I realized love without respect isn't love, it's convenience. And anyone who needs you small, obedient, or indebted to stay close was never on your side. I don't hate my ex. I don't even hate her family. I just see them clearly now. And clarity is powerful. I didn't get married. I didn't get the life I thought I was building. But I walked away with something far more important, my dignity intact. Sometimes, people ask if I regret ending it so abruptly. I don't. Because the truth is, I didn't lose a fiancé that night. I lost the version of myself who thought love had to hurt to be real, and I finally got the chance to become someone better.